This would be a disappointment with God, number 3. We're going to look at the nation of Israel. Now, in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul starts off with this where he says, "Well, I would not have you to be ignorant." Okay, so there are 7 times in the New Testament that little phrase is found, "I would not have you to be ignorant." And that's not an insult. It's just saying, don't ignore this. And 6 of these are by Paul and 1's by Peter. And when you read 1 Corinthians 10 and following, you'll see it's dealing with the history of the nation of Israel. And when you drop down to verse 11, it says, "Now all these things happened unto them for in samples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come." So notice it's written for our admonition, not doctrine. And in Romans 15, verse 4, Paul also brought this idea up. And he said, "For whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope." Again, so the ideas that have been written down, Old Testament, Gospels, aforetime, are written for our learning, not for our doctrine. And I've talked to people who've been disappointed with life, and they usually transfer this disappointment to God. And Daniel and Ezekiel provide a pattern for this, or shall I say Ezekiel. And the 4,600 Jewish people who were taken to Babylon and attempted to be brainwashed into Babylonian culture. And these captives complained that God was not treating them fairly. And so they were saying he's not equal. So they were complaining that he was not treating them fairly. And this is often an accusation that people have who express, who are disappointed with life, hence disappointed with God. There are 3 basic accusations against God of the disappointed. Is that they'll say God is unfair, and of course what they mean is to me, and God is silent, of course, to me, and God is hidden, and of course to me. And I believe a person ought to be honest, because you feel like that. I've felt like that many times. And so people, now the claim is that if God would be fair and not silent and hidden, then a person would follow God or believe in God. If God acted fairly, spoke clearly, made himself known openly. Okay, but Israel, the nation of Israel, when you read the Old Testament, it proves that theory wrong. Now, when you go to Ezekiel chapter 16, Ezekiel, the priest over there, is informing these people that God found them like an abandoned child. Thus saith the Lord God unto Jerusalem, thy birth and thy nativity is of the land of Canaan. Thy father was an Amorite, and thy mother an Hittite. And as for thy nativity, in the day that thou wast born, thy navel was not cut, neither wast thou washed in water to supple thee. Thou wast not salted at all, nor swaddled at all. None I pitied thee to do any of these unto thee, to have compassion on thee, but thou wert cast out in the open field to the loathing of thy person in the day that thou wast born. Is comparing Israel to be in Egypt of 430 years of, shall we say, silence of God from Abraham until Egypt. Okay, and so when we see that God did what he did for Israel in Egypt, and you keep reading down through Ezekiel 16, you will see that he raised this infant, he put clothes on this infant, put a jewel on her forehead, decked her with gold and silver and jewelry. And what did she do with all this? In verse 15, but thou didst trust in thy beauty, and playedst the harlot because of thy renown, and pourest out thy fornications at everyone that passed by his it was. So this would be the exact feeling that a Christian parents would feel if their daughter went out and, whored around in the youth group at a church. It would break their heart. But that's what Israel and Judah did to God. Okay, and so God raised Israel from an infant. Now, when you and I read what Ezekiel says about these people in Ezekiel 8, 16, and 23, sort of kind of X-rated, you and I, from looking from the outside in, to say they deserve what they got. In fact, the ones who were taken captive back to Babylon were actually better off than the ones that were killed in Jerusalem and remained in that poverty situation. You see, just as a mother provides everything for an infant, so the Lord did for Jerusalem. And as a growth of a child into adulthood involves self-sufficiency, so the Lord God expects the same for his children. Now, he desires voluntary fellowship and friendship of the adult child, and that is a great joy when that is experienced by a parent. Now, Jeremiah, he was the last prophet over there. I'll read a little bit of his description, and you will see from our perspective, these people deserved what they got. And this is usually when God is done with a society or nation, when he brings in judgment. And the Lord uses various means of judging a nation. Sometimes it's a war where another nation conquers them. Sometimes it's fire, like he did with Sodom and Gomorrah. Sometimes it's turning someone into salt, like he did Lot's wife, or turning an entire nation or society into stone, petrified them. Sometimes an earthquake will cause liquefaction, and a mud flood will destroy the people and then bring dirt and mud up to 5, 6, 8, 20 feet, sometimes 40 feet of mud, where a building looks like it's buried in the ground, and you have an entire civilization. This was the colonists came into America, where there was abandoned cities already built because they experienced the judgment of God. Yes, stone structure, amazing stone structures and antiquity, extending from an ancient empire, worldwide empire called Tartaria, where God had reached the limit with these people, and so then he judged them. Jeremiah 19 will reveal the limit when God says, okay, I'm done. Jeremiah 19:3, hear ye the word of the Lord, O kings of Judah, inhabitants of Jerusalem. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, behold, I will bring evil upon this place, the which whosoever heareth his ears shall tingle, because they have forsaken me, and have estranged this place, the temple, and have burned incense in it unto other gods. Okay, so you got Baal, Ashtoreth, Chemosh, you've got the Molech, the god of the owl. For neither they nor their fathers have known, nor the kings of Judah, and have filled this place with the blood of innocents. They are actually sacrificing innocent children in a Jewish temple. Verse 5, they have built also the high places of Baal to burn their sons with fire for burnt offerings unto Baal, which I commanded not, nor spake it, neither came into my mind. Now, of course, the Lord was not going to do this. Neither came into my mind is implying it didn't even cross my mind to encourage you to do something like this. And he says, therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that this place shall no more be called Tophet, nor the valley of the son of Hinnon, but the valley of slaughter. That's the limit. The limit of God is when a society accepts the sacrifice of children to gain the good favor of the devil and his kingdom in order to get wealth, free energy, or whatever you want to call it. And they get adrenochrome, and they get the blood of these children. That's the limit. And I would dare say, a lot of these folks who are now learning the truth about Tartaria and this advanced civilization in North America prior to the 1800s, prior to the colonists being here, where Chicago is exactly where Chicago is before Christopher Columbus ever found down in Cuba in that area. And I bet you these pioneers, when they came across in their horse and buggies and covered wagons, and like the Mormons came into Salt Lake City and found an entire grown over buildings, it just probably blew their minds. But it should show you and I the judgment of God in the cities. And in due time, I'm going to deal more with this idea of Tartaria and the satanic aspect of it and how that has gone on in the past. So these Jews in Babylon actually should be grateful to God for sparing them of the judgment of Jerusalem. But no, they're saying God's unfair. Now, God promised his friend Abraham. Abraham reveals what God desires from us is a friendship based on trust. And he promised to Abraham that he's going to get some land and he's going to get some descendants to populate that land. He promised that in Genesis 17. In 1 Psalm 105, he said that's an everlasting covenant. Now, that covenant will not be transferred to Gentiles or the church. American Christians now thinking that either they're the new Israel or God has dumped Israel totally. And plus, apostate and fake Jews will not inherit that millennial promises either. And this is one thing that the foolishness that the church is going to inherit these Abrahamic promises are overlooking that Israel is infested with apostate, fake Jews who are not true Jews. All Israel's not Israel, according to Romans 9, and he's not saying you're Gentiles. These fake Jews are Gentiles. And now the church, he warned them in Romans 11, if you're going to think that God dumped Israel totally, then I'm going to dump you or blind you like I did Israel. And of course, this is what's happening. And for us Bible believers, it's a good sign because it shows we're close, and it's a blessing. Now, these folks that claim that if God would act fairly and speak clearly, make himself known openly, then I will follow them. Well, the pattern of control or guidance to the desire of self-control is what a parent wants, or a choice to love is manifested in the history of Israel. Okay, so he introduces himself to Moses. I am that I am. God acted fairly with Israel. He spoke clearly to them. He made himself known to them. He planned their daily schedule, just like a parent would do for a child. And for 40 days and 40 nights, when Moses was talking to God, what did Israel do? And went right back to Egypt, right back to the golden calf. Then they had to wander for 40 years. Then Joshua brings the children of Israel into the land of Canaan, and the first battle, who destroyed the walls? God did everything. All they had to do was march in. Those walls were probably destroyed by a directed energy weapon, which the military is able to use, and this was probably what was used at 9/11 by Bush and Cheney and company, or at least authorized. And so God destroyed Jericho completely. God did everything. Eventually, when you read through Joshua, you'll see that God was sort of kind of withdraw back, and he would want his own children to do some of the fighting. It's like a parent, you put the training wheels on the bicycle, and then you run beside the bicycle when you take the training wheels off, but then you've got to let that child ride that bike, and that's what the Lord does for us. The book of Judges reveals a vicious cycle, back and forth, back and forth. And then God went with 3 kings, 40 years each. Saul began good, ended bad. David, a man after God's own heart, was a true blessing to God. Man, what a blessing he was to God. But as the devil put pressure on him, physically, fleshly, he made a mess of things here and there. But his general thing was he's a man after God's own heart, and he was a true blessing to God. Now, because of those fleshly dealings, he wasn't allowed to build a temple for God. He allowed Solomon to do that. Solomon shows an extreme high and extreme low spiritual plateau and valley. Now, God offered Solomon wisdom. When Solomon asked for wisdom, God was pleased with that speech, and he not only gave him wisdom, he gave him wealth and a long life. And Solomon ruled, and people would have thought the golden age has come in. Oh, utopia has come in play. Golden age of peace and prosperity. A lot of what these folks tend to think Tartaria was all about, when if you look at the symbolism, you're going to see something different behind the scenes. Now, Solomon lavished wealth to build a glorious temple to make God feel loved. And the dedication of that temple was a high mark in the Old Testament. And God responded with a glorious special effect of lightning and glory in 2 Chronicles 7. Oh man, oh man. And God appeared a second time to Solomon. It seemed to them that the Abrahamic covenant was fulfilled with land and people of wealth. But Solomon reveals an epitaph that in this world there are only two tragedies. One is not getting what one wants, and the other is getting it. Because God warned these Jews that when they do get the wealth and prosperity and the peace in Deuteronomy 8, he warned them, don't forget me. Don't forget me. But they did. They enjoyed the blessings of God and slowly and subtly forgot the God of the blessings. And after Solomon, the kingdoms of Israel and eventually Judah became like a soap opera as the kingdom turns. And then God quietly turned to selective individuals, the prophets, to try to get their attention. The first couple choices, did he use some flamboyant and special effects to get their attention? Elijah worked miracles to clobber the evil forces in 1 Kings 18, exposed the hypocrisy of the people, and revealed the power of the holy God. And how'd that pan out? Did they faithfully follow God after that? No. This is why Christian television, charismatic movement, these people are a bunch of carnal baby Christians who really are trying to manipulate God to get their way. And the only ones getting rich on it are the fake healers on the 700 Club. How did Elijah respond after this tremendous victory? The supernatural powers prevailed. The next chapter, he got depressed. After that great supernatural victory, Elijah became depressed, and God revealed to him a hidden remnant. And then he revealed a still small voice. That's how God's going to work during these, quote, silent years. Elisha had double the power of Elijah, but after them, most of the remaining prophets were limited to the power of words to quietly convict the conscience. And how did they treat him? That's right. You know how they treated him. They killed him and everything. When you read those prophets who didn't have many signs and miracles, who were basically limited to using words to convict the conscience, these prophets struggled personally with what appeared to be the unfairness of God or his silence and why God was hiding, even though God told those Jews that he was going to hide from them. And you'll see the struggles that they have, and that's where you and I can get comfort from those silent times of God. Habakkuk, I really enjoy his questions that he asks out about these, what appears to be inconsistencies at the end of chapter 1. At the beginning of chapter 2, he says, I'll wait for you to reprove me. In other words, he's saying, Lord, I just don't get it. I don't get all these. Why do you seem so unfair? Why are you so silent? Why are you hiding? But I'm sure you're right and I'm wrong, and I'll wait for you to correct me. You see, God's slowness to act is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of mercy. And then God chose to close out the Old Testament with 400 years of silence. Now, what I mean by that is silence in the big picture, where he still works with the individual. And in the next video on the disappointment with God, I'm going to go through 3 times of silence, 400 silent years. But that's how the Old Testament ends, in apostasy and a curse. And then he's going to bring out the most beautiful example of someone who personifies God, who is God, the Lord Jesus Christ. So we'll go through that, Lord willing, on the 4th and final video of disappointment with God.